This is the best part about building a food forest. You hear that? So we've been really focusing the last couple of years on building wildlife plants. And my apologies if any wind noise is blocking what you're hearing, but we have got tons of birds that are moving in and nesting in our cedars. And I've spoken about it before, but I was going to take some of these cedars down to open up more sunlight for the fruit trees. And then I read how valuable cedars and evergreens in general are for early nesting sites for birds. So I decided to leave quite a few cedars up. You know, probably 90% of my cedars I ended up leaving up. And it's rewarded me with moments like this in the early springtime. And you'll also notice that we don't really tidy up our food forest and gardens in the fall time. We actually let it go and do its own natural thing. We let the seeds stay up. We let the debris fall down and stay down. We actually actively put in little piles to act as habitat. And we have leaf bags kind of strewn about, dumped out all along contour here. And what that does, I talked about it in my firefly video and restoring habitat for fireflies and other endangered insects. And what it does is it mimics what a natural forest does and what a natural ecosystem does. Because at the end of fall, if we go into our gardens and our food forests and we tidy everything up, we actually remove all the nesting sites for all the insects. And we remove the insects away, we're removing the food for birds. And this is doubly true for the food source of birds early on in the spring, like right now. And I know that we're actually in March, at least as of the filming of this video. And normally in March, it's still minus 10, minus 20 Celsius. We're dealing with a changing climate, and so is the living biosphere of the earth, trying to adapt and change to the quickly changing climate. So anywhere that you can on your property, create ecosystems and habitat to support diversity and life, you get rewarded with moments like this. And you know that, you know, at least in some small part, you're making a positive change in the world. So we never tidy up our gardens until well into the fall. Even going against common practice like cleaning up asparagus, because apparently, you know, there's some diseases and insects that will actually eat the asparagus if you leave it up. I've found that not cleaning up my asparagus hasn't really changed too much at all. And then we also plant tons and tons of plants just specifically for nature. Drop down here in the swale here. All along this whole swale that I'm looking back on is basically, you kind of can't really see them that well, but it's a ton of small little serviceberry trees. Serviceberry trees are a favorite of birds, and I put them even right in the raspberry patch here. For example, here's one right there. So this will eventually become the overstory of this raspberry patch and grow up right through it. The raspberries can come through. I can clean up the raspberries, but not yet. We won't do that yet. We'll do that in a little bit. And we also leave a lot of this staghorn sumac up. Staghorn sumac is a favorite for bees as well as birds. And a lot of people will say to get rid of the staghorn sumac because it's a bit of a rhizome spreading plant. Oh, they're getting quiet. But I leave them up for the birds. See if we can get in here and see any of them. So I'm down here now in what many people who watch the channel regularly will know is the Old Man Walking Trail. And you can see how wild this is left. The grasses were actually intentionally left long over the winter time. We didn't come and mow any of this because this is all great habitat for insects, for snakes, for even moles and voles, things that people actively try to exclude from their gardens. I encourage them because they're all part of the biosphere. Behind me, this here is another garden that we let go very wild, and we basically just spread wildflower seeds in here and then planted a bunch of nut trees. So we've got a bunch of heart nut and hazelnut and walnut down in here, and I think that they should all do okay. This is a shagbark hickory here. And then with the rest of it, we just are going to let it go wild. Because of this, we're kind of rewarded with this bounty of life and diversity on the property. And to me, that's half the joy of doing this. You know, half of this I'm doing for family self-preservation in the times that are coming. I'm doing it for resiliency, self-sufficiency, growing some of my own food for when the global supply chains break down due to the end of oil that's coming, that I've got a food forest where I can harvest food from that's kind of hidden from the road. You know, there's the house way up there, and it's hidden down in here. Nobody really knows about it. If you don't watch this YouTube channel, my property looks fairly innocuous from the road. You don't know that I've got all this food everywhere. Apple trees and pawpaws, cherry, elderberry, persimmon all down here, raspberry, asparagus thrown everywhere, and then tons of herbs. We've got access to fresh water on the site. This is one of the most important things for site selection. When I chose this place, I really wanted to have a river nearby. That river feeds a small lake in the back, kind of marshy swamp. Even this area here where we've had some sumac fall down. Sorry about that. We've had some sumac fall down. I've actually left it up now for about 2 years because it's kind of acting as a bit of a deer deflection. And even back in there, I might clean them up at some point, but for now what I wanted to do is all the cherry trees and elderberry that I planted in here, I want it to get established and up and running, free of deer browse, at least as much as possible. So I have planted a bunch of apple trees back in there. There's also wild apple trees that I prune and cut, and I practice my my grafting on. Like all of these back in here behind the sumac, these are all wild apples that I practice the pruning on, and that acts as food for the deer. And then we kind of shelter and wall them off by leaving some of this up. I'd woven in a little stick fence back in there as well, because that's kind of the main entry point from the outside zones into my food forest property here. So we're trying to kind of protect this emerging food forest down in here while we build it up. And then this here is the back of the pond, and this is the wildflower hill where we actively planted in thousands of different plants. And I've got a video called Sowing Chaos, and that is a video showing when I planted and sowed out this wildflower hill here. And it's actually so wild in here in the spring that I can't even really get back in here without fear of ticks. So I don't really come down here too much. I leave it for nature, and I'll come down here in the summer only when I know that the tick problem is kind of receded away. But I don't come here too much in the spring and the fall because ticks are probably my biggest concern on the property here. But this is the back of the pond, and you can even see this back of the pond I let go fairly wild. But we plant for nature, tons of service berries and all that kind of good stuff here. Tons of oregano. Just herbs everywhere, flowers for nature everywhere, and we really do get rewarded. Hey Rosie, got lots of friends out here that you chase around, all the bunnies. So thanks for coming by. Small little tour where we talk about the importance of planting things for nature and having water sources for them. Even if you don't do a huge pond like this, it's really good to have water features on your property. I'll show you one that I did earlier on in my permaculture journey. We've got water lotus in there, and it's just a small little micro pond with rocks that I found around the neighborhood. And I built this, and this thing has been providing tons of life and water for birds, tons of snakes and frogs in there, and dragonflies as well. And that's right at my compost pile. And the compost pile, when it rains, all the leachate, I've graded it so that it won't come into the pond. It's actually angled back and down, and then it goes into this swale. And then any kind of rainwater that's hitting compost piles, or when this overflows from lots of rain, it flows down in here, and all this nutrient-rich water goes right across this swale here. So we plant with elevation in mind. You can kind of see how the swale propagates across there. And then we've got bartnut and heartnut and serviceberry and apple trees all planted along that swale, with some serviceberry here as well. Serviceberry is one of my favorite plants, just specifically because it's such a nature plant. So I think I'll cut it off here. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.